Chad was first elected to the House of Representatives in 2007. In 2011, he switched over to the Senate, and unfortunately, in my view, just served his last session in 2017. During his time in the legislature, he has served in a leadership role on many water issues, chairing the Senate Natural Resources Committee, the Water Policy Interim Committee, and the Environmental Quality Council. Please welcome Chaz Vincent.
Thank you, Holly. It's a pretty hard act to follow. Are we doing all right on time?
Not quite.
Not quite? Okay, well, I just want to say how big an honor it is, first of all, to be up here. And in following these three individuals, there's a lot of things that I've worked on in my 12 years in the legislature that was really built upon a lot of the foundations that they all put in, and we're standing on their shoulders. So thank you all for your service. And really helping me understand why it's going to be really nice to retire for a break. For a bit anyways, maybe we'll say. But I mean, I am a classic example. When I started the legislature, I was clean shaven, had hair, and was single. All right? Look at me now. But I've had a lot of great experiences in the legislature, and particularly involved in these natural resource policy discussions. And I'd like to talk kind of in the same venue, according to what I was asked to come talk about, Zach, was a few policy things that I was engaged in, maybe some water policy things that are on the horizon, being as I'm one of the newer legislators that are working on some issues. And I'd like to leave you with a couple of things to think about. So, I think it's also good to start with just to give a good example of anybody who's interested in getting involved in water policy. I guess I thought it was something that was pretty straightforward, pretty clear-cut, and wasn't going to be too difficult to really wade into this conversation, right? And we're going to pass some legislation. So when I got there in 2007, I introduced a bill that was going to declare that all hydroelectric energy produced in the state was to be considered renewable. It makes common sense. It makes complete sense. I mean, gravity, it's renewable, it goes through a turbine. Why can't that be renewable? Little did I know or paid attention to the fact that Senator Tester just passed a Renewable Portfolios Act in the previous session, and that my bill would completely undermine and eradicate it. But I was up in, I think it's 471 in the fourth floor of where House Natural Resources is, and Senator Konauer was actually vice chairman of that committee while I was in there, and I got to note that my bill hearing was down on the very first floor in room 172. And I was really nervous. It was my very first bill, and I got all my stuff together, and I went all the way down the stairs, and I got down to the bottom and looked out into the hallway, and it was packed. They had TVs out in the hallway because there wasn't enough room inside the hearing, and I thought, man, there is something controversial going on here. Wading through everybody, and boy howdy, and got inside and up to the podium, and the chairman called me right up, and he says, how many folks are here as a proponent to this legislation? And I looked around, and there was two individuals that had their arms in the air. The cooperative members were there to support me, and he said, well, who is here as an opposition to this bill? And arms were flying up, legs were flying up, the door flung open, 8 people stuck their head in the door. That was my first initiation as a policymaker into water policy, and something that seems so simple. Can't hydroelectric power be considered renewable being so complicated? And that pretty well explains what anybody should be really looking at and trying to understand where we should be going. First, we have to understand how we got to where we're at. And I can tell you that some of the greatest teachers that I had in that was with really my real first substantive policy engagement. It wasn't a bill that I had, it was a bill that Representative Walt McNutt had. And it was 831, I believe, at the time. And I'm not sure, I think Jill was actually a part of that discussion as well. But I was really, after learning that, man, this is a lot more complicated than I thought, I wanted to try to get into the wing of some people who were really involved in it. And that bill was a result of a 2006 decision, I believe it was TU versus DNRC, saying that groundwater and surface water are connected. Something else that we would think would be common sense, but something else that really wasn't considered before in the permitting of water in the state of Montana. And so in closed basins, you could not get a new water right, or you could not augment an existing water right. There were people that were kind of stuck in between when this decision came down, and we needed to process through it. And whoa, that was the policy discussion on water of the entire session, that session. And it was a rip-roaring one, but I got to learn a whole lot. I got to learn, where is Crystal Lee Evans? Is she in here? There she is. She was actually working for Legislative Council at the time, and was working on Saturdays and Sundays while we were working on the many different variations of the bill, all the different science and scientists that were bringing things in. Holly Franz I got to meet Holly Franz with 8:30. I got to meet John Tubbs, who was just a lowly water division administrator at that time. A whole host of individuals that have spent a career, a lifetime working in water policy, and boy did I learn that I had a lot to learn. That bill got through, and there was, from there on, and I noticed that you noticed a common theme with some of the previous speakers about science. And that's one of the things that I think we need to take a really clear look at when we're talking about water policy, and we need to have science leading these discussions. But we also can't have these discussions out in front of science. It cuts both ways. And one of the things that I've really become a big believer in is entities like the Bureau of Mines and Geology in Butte. Third-party scientists that can provide good, solid, objective water modeling, for example, to make good, solid policy decisions ongoing forward. We need to be looking at how we better prop the Bureau up to help the DNRC, to help the Legislature do some things that are really going to be defining. We were talking about non-point mixing zones, point solution. I got to tell you, those in the agriculture world, I just disagree with one of the comments that was made about non-point not being a problem. It's going to be here soon. TMDL issues, point source dischargers are under the gun, or the microscope I should say right now, trying to find ways to have treatment technologies to actually meet the standards that are not scientifically achievable at this point in many commercial applications. So they're right up against it right now, but when you really look at the total daily maximum load on a stream and you look at where the pollution is really coming from, it isn't from the point source, folks. And as soon as they find a solution to some of these mechanical treatment processes, when we can perfect the RO process, that's where this discussion is going to be shifting. So everybody in the non-point world, and I'm a fourth generation logger, believe me, it hits me just like it hits anybody with a disc and a plow. We better be finding a way through this discussion, because it is going to be happening, and it is going to be something that is going to be led by the Clean Water Act and the EPA. Exempt wells, yeah, boy. I don't know if anybody's been talking about that lately, but Holly mentioned that I did chair water policy naturally, and I got off of water policy maybe so I could get away from exempt wells for interim. It's going to be an ongoing discussion, and it's something that we do have to solve. I would differ with maybe some different, I believe that we need to have exempt wells, but it's how we have that science allowing them and where they're allowed. One of the bills that I passed in my tenure is allowing stream depletion zones to be created in places where you can petition to have basically it's a call on an exempt well, because that is the problem with exempt wells. Nobody wants to make a call, but what this would be is a call on irrigating your lawn and a lot of the consumptive uses that are associated with those domestic uses. Stream depletion zones, I believe we got 2 so far. I think it's something that we need to be looking at really hard, and that's why I say propping up the Bureau of Mines and Geology to be able to get the science, because you know what? Everybody who's been dealing with any type of hydrological report knows that $250,000 is a starting point in many of them. very expensive, very time consuming, and going to be hard to implement unless we have science. And we have people that we can trust the science that we're considering. On those, I gotta say on that exempt well front as well. You know, most of the states, when you get outside of an area that doesn't live with high transmissivity in soils and places where there are actual irrigators that are having actual impacts from the real subdivision that was put in on Uncle Larry's farm after he sold it to the developer, it's not an issue. That's a small percentage of the state where that is happening. But we all have to remember that under the prior appropriation process, the water right that we have decreed in our name, it is a property right. And if you were stepping on one, you could be the next. So it does matter when it's a small amount of people that are being impacted by exempt wells. How we implement regulatory policies around protecting those property rights is very, very critical, because the public at large, over 90% of the state, as for what I've seen in my travels, do not believe that exempt wells are the issue facing water in the state. And we're going to have a really hard time really ratcheting those things down unless we are surgical in the policies moving forward with exempt wells. And I don't want to come back. When I do come back, I hope that it's over with. I am done with exempt wells. Dear Lord. I think we've got an issue coming up pretty rapidly. One of the other things that I've had the honor and privilege of doing in the legislature is carry some of the funding for the Montana Water Court. Although I'd say there's some shame that could be blamed for some of the legislators in the 80s for kind of dropping the ball on the water adjudication process. The ball was picked back up and has been being moved forward in a fairly persistent and with measured progress. And I got to give a lot of kudos to the director of the DNRC who was here on making sure that all those preliminary reports and everything are in time, and we're getting through this. We're chewing through this. We're almost to temporary preliminary decrees, something that we talked about having in 1982 or 83. We're now going to maybe get there by 2021. It's pretty exciting. That gap, though, that amount of time between 1979 and 2018, 2021, maybe when we get to a final decree by 2028, we're going to have some problems with that gap. Because we have some other perceived problems with some of the other permitting processes, things like the change process. We have individuals that aren't wanting to go through that process, that haven't been through that process, that are doing things with water that nobody knows about until we start enforcing decrees. And we're going to have we have a lot of stale decrees that are going to be needed to be addressed. How do we address those things? And when you get into these change processes, I'm just going to tell you, it's really confusing it from a legislative standpoint if you're new to the process, or even for somebody from the audience if you're sitting and watching one of these things, because you will see the same people speak out of both sides of their mouth about the water right process in the same day, 2 hours apart. It's just, I mean, it's like you're in the twilight zone, but it will happen. You will have a senior irrigator standing up there at the podium saying, by God, you better make this application process the toughest and most rigorous thing that you've ever seen in your entire existence, because by God, that's my property right. And then they'll turn around on the next bill that tries making that change process a little easier for them so where they don't have to prove their beneficial use or where they're using it, and they want it to be really quick and easy. And cheap. That is at the heart of some of these discussions, that when you're trying to figure out who it is that you listen to, who it is that you're going to follow into this, and that's where I can tell you there's really only a handful for me that I will follow into these policy discussions and get real honest answers, and I mentioned a couple of them earlier, because you have to have those, and we each that are involved in this process need to hold each other honest in these discussions, because we're never going to get a solution unless we do. One of the other issues I think we need to be wrestling with really quickly is the role of the water court into the future. What is going to be that role of the water court? Do we need a water court? We just talked about the stale decrees. We talked about a lot of things that are going to be needing to be addressed. Should that be happened in the district courts? Should it be handled by DNRC? Or should it be the entity that has been underwriting all of these decrees that are likely going to be stale and needing updated. How do we go about that? It's a big decision. I know when you try to have that conversation like I have over the last few sessions, you get, it's too preliminary, that's too early. Let's just worry about getting this adjudication done. It's going to be here faster than we think, so hopefully, right? And lastly, one thing that could, when it was spoken about earlier, blow up pretty much everything I've talked about as far as timelines or responsible development policy expectations in the water policy world, and that is the compact. We had a great conversation at my table today for lunch about that. There's a Will Rogers quote that goes, "It's not what people know that's the problem, it's what they know that ain't so. That's the problem." And there isn't a more accurate quote for one single piece of policy than the CSKT Water Compact. It has an incredible reach into every single person's life that has an intersection with water, which is just about everybody, some more than others. We have 85 water basins. We have many of those decrees that are ready to be enforceable here pretty quick, and we have 2/3 of them that could be reopened if we decide to not ratify the CSKT Compact in Congress and we choose to adjudicate it in our water court. We have people that have mortgaged their homes to get through the existing watering process, adjudicative process. They're going to get a little card in the mail and it's going to tell them they got to go back. I always feel it. So, I'm tired, it's a long drive and I get emotional. This is one of those things that I do. My thing that I leave you with is an action item in that regard. And that is, you need to learn about it. You're here, travel all the way here for this seminar. God bless you for doing it, sitting through me. My homework assignment to you is to learn something about the CSKT Compact. And my email address is online. You can find me. I've got virtually every question that has ever been asked about the compact with the help of, it's not me creating the answers, it's with the Attorney General, people like Director Tubbs and everybody who was involved in this discussion for many decades. I've got legal peer-reviewed answers for any question you can think of. I've heard them all. Believe me, I've heard them all. I can help disseminate that information. We need to be disseminating this information. We need to be talking to our neighbors. We need to be talking about this over the backyard fence. We need to be talking about and it's water conversations are not easy to maintain. It's really difficult. But if you start talking to people about how their what their city water right cost could be, when you start talking to somebody who has never even driven through the Flathead Reservation once or twice in their life, having to re-adjudicate their entire ranch because of a failed negotiation, the compact and the CSKT negotiation will be considered one of the greatest failures in Montana's history if it is not completed in Congress. I spent a lot of time talking about that. And I can tell you that I was one of those people who were on the other side of the compact for a long time, led the opposition, in fact, did so good with my damn talking points that they were beating me at one point when I came back. It's easy to be on the wrong side of this issue. And my point in saying that is don't judge those people for those positions. There is a lot of really good people that just have a wrong understanding about something that is going to be very, very important. The reason that I am starting to panic a little bit about this is that there is a 4-year clock inside of this compact that not a lot of people know about. And at that point, the state could pull out, feds could pull out, tribe could pull out. My worry is that the tribes pull out, honestly. They stand the most to gain by doing it the other way. And we stand the most to lose, and I don't want to be proven right. So that is what I would leave you all with. Love to answer any questions on that front. And I'll give you, I guess I'd leave you with another Will Rogers quote. He said, "Never miss a good opportunity to shut up."